Okay, I'm going to officially start. So hi all, so I just want to welcome you to this webinar Wednesday on digital education. This is our fourth one of the series, so it's 8 in this series. Before we started with the presentations and everything, I just want to let you know a bit of housekeeping rules. We have everyone on mute, you know yourself, the joys of background noises and stuff like that, but there will be an opportunity for question and answers during the webinar. Just to let you also know that this is going to be recorded, so we'll be using it for our website and also for other training purposes as well. So if any of you are camera shy, I say to turn off your camera. It will be very much presentation focused anyway, so there's not much opportunity for your face being shown anyway. So I'm going to put you over to Paul, who's going to facilitate today's webinar. So Paul is going to say hi.
Hi everybody, good morning. Just making sure the slides are on and we're ready to roll. That's good. Lots of mice and screens here. Yes, indeed, webinar Wednesdays. A bit of a task here, 1 hour to get across a fairly complex yet very important topic of digital education. I've been asked by Léargas to come along and try and sort of keep the wheels moving this morning, but we will have numerous speakers. Siobhan Wallace from the National Agency is also here, and Dee may be joining us as well, in addition to Carroll and others. But yeah, I think we need to jump straight in because I'm conscious of time and people have lots of slots. These webinars and telemeetings are very much ever present in today's world. So let's try and get the slides clicking forward. So we want to begin, first of all, by setting the scene, letting you know what's coming up and sort of zoning in on what we mean by digital education under this heading. So the objective for today is that we have an opportunity in the hour ahead to consider the theme of digital education, but specifically in terms of what we call the Erasmus Plus extraordinary call. Extraordinary in the sense that we don't normally have a call for Key Action 2 strategic partnerships in these fields at this time of year. And extraordinary in the sense that this is a very much a response to the coronavirus, to COVID-19. And the targeting of funds to 2 particular areas, one of which we will focus on today, which is digital education and digital education readiness. The agenda, fairly ambitious agenda for a 1 hour slot, but nonetheless, we have an introduction and overview, which we're already in. We will give you a little bit of policy context in terms of the theme of this event, which is digital education, and Siobhan will then come in and share and confirm to us at least the basics of the extraordinary funding that is available. But there have been other sessions in and around what strategic partnerships are, and there will be other sessions on funding. So this is really just the basics. We'll talk about the European frameworks, and then Jane O'Hara from Trinity College Dublin is going to share with us some thoughts on key concepts in and around delivering digital education. We will ask you guys to share with us some thoughts. Nobody escapes. So if you have a pen and paper, don't run away now and find one. We'll ask you to either share in the chat room or write something down and hold it up to the screen. But we'll ask you guys for some immediate thoughts on just 3 questions. We were going to break up into little breakout rooms, but we realized that's fairly ambitious considering the time slot that we have available. And then Lauren Carroll will bring with us some of her experiences from the wheel in and around a project that she's been running recently. I'm not going to say more, Lauren, I'll leave that to you when we get to that. And then we'll come to a close. All of that in 1 hour, you lucky people. So I think, first of all, let us zone back in on what is this call, this Erasmus Plus extraordinary call, and what is it exactly targeting? Because hopefully you're here because you want to better understand the theme, the topic under which this money is being made available. So the call extends itself to some of the themes, some of the fields of education and training under the heading of Erasmus Plus, and specifically digital education readiness extends to the field of school education, to higher education, and to vocational education and training. So in this case, adult education and youth are targeted through another sub-element of the call, but not for this one. This does include, you know, online distance and blended learning. It includes capacity building for teachers and trainers, and it includes any element that is focused on equality of opportunity and inclusiveness under the heading of digital education. There are some words here, I'm going to read them out because I haven't memorized them, but we're talking about, for example, capacity building, developing or using high quality digital tools and content, support for teachers, trainers and learners who may be new to this way of or mechanism of delivery, and networking and collaboration, including with those beyond the field of education and training. And that's very important because we are perhaps not world leaders in education and training in terms of technologies, but becoming very familiar with that. In terms of activities, the call itself gives a number of examples. I'm not going to read them all out, but the idea is, you can deploy these tools, you can make use of them in delivering something, but it should be beyond what you already do. You can support learners, teachers, and trainers in adapting previously face-to-face delivery to something that may be blended or hybrid or digital. You can promote safer and more responsible use of digital technologies, and this is very much, again, on the agenda. And of course, it's all about how do we incorporate this into our curricula, into subject-based and into work-based learning and so on. So these are examples of activities, but it's not an exclusive list. Breathe. Policy context. This was some challenge, 5 minutes to get the policy context across, but nonetheless, I'll give you the basics. And really what I suppose I wanted to get across here was that this is not new. It feels very new because we're doing things in a slightly different manner, but it's not new in the sense that actually discussions on the digitization and the adaptation the adaptation of education, training and learning started as far back as 2005. So those discussions, initially led by a research paper, were brought forward by JRC, and what they wanted to do was to inform policy. So in other words, is there a single policy through which we should be thinking about changes and modernization and adaptation, and making sure that, that education and training was reflective of what's going on also in the labor market in terms of the skills and competencies required by employers. Obviously, that wasn't the last piece of activity. So between 2005 and 2020, lots and lots of studies and activities and initiatives have been financed, and I'm certainly not going to try and list those. But also there has been a focus on developing what we would class as common European frameworks for different actors, and we'll come back to those shortly. But what I suppose is very important is that there isn't a single policy, a diktat from above that says this is the way that things should be done. Rather, what's happening is the open method of coordination, which often sort of governs the way that national and European level policy actors work together. That has been adopted, and what it does suggest is that rather than saying this is what you should do, there is an element of encouragement that you align national policies for education and training and digitization with those that are goals and objectives at European level. So that's really what has been happening with the open method of coordination. Now, Erasmus Plus, hopefully this is not new to you, that you've had a chance to consider just for this call or before now what Erasmus Plus has in terms of funding opportunities. And Erasmus Plus has constantly throughout its lifetime, so from 2014 until now, made digital development a priority. And it started very simply in a sense that we talked about digital skills as one of a core set of common soft or transversal skills that all young people should develop during their education. In a 7-year period, we moved from simply having this as one of the core transversal skills to having plans for digital integration in teaching and learning. And more recently, in 2019 and 20, we start to talk about such issues such as open and innovative practices in a digital era. So we've seen progression even in the 7 years of the Erasmus Plus program. In addition to that, there have been very specific policy agendas in the fields of, let's say, higher education, school education, vet, and other fields. And in addition to those, there's a common European agenda. So we're not going to dig into these. I've provided some links here into perhaps some examples from 2017 and 16. But what I think I wanted to stress was for those of you thinking of putting something together under this heading, and I think there is an expectation that you would relate this back to national policy, to European level policy and priorities. When you're looking at the bigger picture, there will be possibly a temptation, especially those who've got an old project idea and maybe reshaping it, to refer back to the 2016 New Skills Agenda for Europe. This was really our sort of mandate for the last 5 years. But what we've got to be very careful of is the fact that just a few months ago, a new skills agenda came up. This has this wonderful title of the European Skills Agenda for Sustainable Competitiveness, social fairness and resilience. And I just wanted to share with you the fact that A, this exists, and B, this really ought to be your go-to if you are thinking about relating what you're planning with the Common European Agenda. And the Common European Agenda in this case is from 2020 to 2025, in which any future project would be operational. And of course, there are 12 different actions extending across different areas of higher, vocational, school, adult, etc. education. But what I wanted to highlight was this, the bottom of the first column, which talks about the twin transitions. And here we're talking about digital transition and climate transition. And obviously these are very important things. And if we're talking about digitization of education, digital education readiness, you certainly need to be aligning what it is that you're planning with this goal for, you know, developing skills for twin transitions, be it at professional or at a learner level. Finally, in the policy context, I just wanted to confirm that 2018 saw the bringing forth of a digital education action plan at European level, which talked about the challenges of digital transformation for education, and which highlighted, you know, 3 specific priorities. One, for making better use of digital technology, so not just using it, but making sure that it was quality use. One was for digital transformation and digital skills and competencies. We'll talk about the framework in a second. And the third one was about the use of data to allow us to better plan and to have better foresight. And, you know, we're often looking at how do we use data now on learning to be able to inform change and improvement along the line. So Erasmus Plus certainly has looked at these areas in terms of setting its priorities, and in the Digital Education Action Plan, it's pleasing to see that Erasmus Plus is also cited as a means of delivering the action plan. What it is worth acknowledging, however, is that, you know, that was really set to the end of 2020. The new version isn't out yet, don't go looking for it, it's in consultation. We expect to see it delivered to cover the period 2021 to 2027, but we expect to see that delivered perhaps towards the end of this year, if not early next year. That's the big policy context. I get to take a breather here and hand over to Siobhan. Siobhan, funding opportunities.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So I'm only going to give a very brief overview of funding opportunities. We did have an application workshop last week where we went into a lot of details on the call and the types of opportunities available and how to really design a strategic partnerships project. So I will direct you to the link to the recording of that application workshop at the end of these slides. So just to say then, a very brief overview of the types of funding, the types of projects that are available under this funding call. It is an additional call, but it is for strategic partnerships. So very similar to the main strategic partnership setup under the main call. So you would be able to apply for funding for strategic partnerships to support the exchange of good practice, which is really projects about linking with European partners, developing and reinforcing networks, and exchanging ideas, practices, or methodologies in areas of common interest. Obviously, the common interest in this particular call would be to do with digital education. Or you could apply for a strategic partnership supporting innovation, which is allows you to, in addition to all of the types of activities you would undertake in an exchange practice project, it would allow you to develop innovative outputs and also engage in intensive dissemination and exploitation activities to further distribute those outputs to a wider audience. So then just to provide some key information, who can apply? Any public or private organization, and anybody can also, any public or private organization can also participate from a program country or indeed any partner country in the world, but only if they bring essential added value. And to find out more about partner countries, I would direct you to the recording of the application workshop that we held last week. You must have at least 3 organizations from 3 different program countries. And the duration of the projects will be between 12 months and 24 months. That's for education and training projects. So in the context of this workshop for schools or vocational education and training, or higher education as well comes under that. And for partnerships in the field of youth, between 6 months and 24 months, but they do not relate to this particular call for digital readiness. So then the deadline is 29th of October 2020, and that they need to be submitted by 11 a.m. Irish time. So just finally, a little bit about the fields that you can apply under. For the purpose of the digital readiness priority, there's two fields that the Léargas manage under which you can apply for funding. The first is the schools field, which covers all areas of school education from preschool to upper secondary. And the indicative budget overall for the schools field for this call is €892,000, although that will be split between digital readiness and the other priority, which we're not covering in this workshop, but we will be covering in our webinar next Wednesday, which is the Partnerships for Creativity. And the second field under which you can apply is vocational education and training, which covers the aspect of training for equipping people with skills, knowledge and competencies for occupations or more broadly on the labour market, covering both initial vocational training and continuing vocational training. And the indicative budget that we have at this point is €381,000, and that's dedicated to the Partnerships for Digital Readiness. So finally, just to provide you, before we hear from the other presenters, to provide you some basic information on further support opportunities under this particular call. So we've already had the application workshop, and this is the webinar Wednesday for digital education. As I said, there's another one for the priority for creativity for change next Wednesday. We'll also be hosting a budget and finance workshop, which will also cover a step-by-step walk through the application form, and that will take place on the 12th of October. And then finally, we have an open house where people can contact us with any questions directly, book in a slot to get one-to-one support before submitting your application, and that's on the 22nd of October. And you can sign up for all of those workshops at that link that I've provided on the slide. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Siobhan. Indeed, yes, just a whistle-stop tour there of the basics. And guys, you really need to know that. If you don't have those basics, watch the video, as Siobhan said. And if your financial issues are also queries, there will be that additional opportunity coming up. We're back into the thematic aspects now. We're coming back to think about digital education and digital education readiness. I definitely, when I heard about this, I thought, okay, but there's been quite a lot done. We've talked about the policy level stuff, which may well be something that you will reference, but there's something much more important to think about, which is what's already been done in terms of frameworks that are guiding the process of digital education and transformation at European level, and against which the national authorities are expected to align their own priorities. And I just wanted to give you a very quick insight and some links for those who are perhaps not familiar with the existing European frameworks. And I would say that anyone that is applying under this heading really must relate back to what's happening and what's already been funded at framework level, because guys, there is no point coming forward and saying, I'm going to develop a lovely European framework. There is one. So that's really not very innovative. So it's just really to make sure that everyone is very familiar. There are 4 worthy of mention today. 2 of them, the first 2 at least, are extremely important and should be thought about. The 3rd and 4th are either more organizational or study-based. And I will give you a very rapid tour. So we talk about DigComp 2.1, which is a citizens framework. We've got DigComp Edu, which is for educators. We've got Edu Pol, which is for policymakers in the field of education, much more of a study. And we've got DigComp Org, which again lacks the Edu reference, but it's actually much more of a self-assessment tool for educational organizations. So the first one, I love this little picture. It comes from their own publication, but is the European Digital Competence Framework. So in a sense, this is the main one that guides what we are looking to deliver to individual citizens, to all of our learners and all ages. And the latest version of the framework is 2.1. So the first one was about 5, 6, 7 years ago, and that has DigComp 1, DigComp 2, and now 2.1. 2.1 looks at 8 levels of competency. And if you look at the circles at the bottom, it goes from something as simple as remembering up to understanding, and then being able to self-evaluate, and then up to being fairly creative. And it goes from what we would class as foundation, intermediate, advanced, and highly specialized. So the idea there is much more information in the framework itself. I've given you a link to that, but there are 5 competence areas, and I thought it was important to highlight what those were. The first one is information and digital literacy, and you can see there browsing, evaluating, managing information and data. Second one is communication and collaboration, so how you people engage with other organizations, with other individuals, and how they use technology to do that. The third one steps up towards digital content creation. The fourth is around safety, which we've already mentioned. And the fifth one is around being able to solve problems in and around digital technology. So this is competence areas for citizens, so it doesn't specifically align itself with, let's say, education per se. If we then move to the digital competence framework for educators, it's interesting to think that this has been adapted in a sense for those delivering education. And here you will see there are 22 competencies, they're not listed, but there are 6 key areas, and these should make some sense. Professional engagement and the use of digital resources. And then we've got teaching and learning and assessment, obviously an important part of the delivery of education and training. Empowering learners and facilitating learners' use of and learners' competence. So of course, when we talk about digital competencies for citizens, it's that access to and facilitation of that level of competence that is there. So again, you know, if you're thinking about developing something for educators, if you're looking at skills development for teachers and trainers on the front line, you should be able to relate back to this framework and to be able to say, well, actually, this is in line with, you know, area 6 competence level 1, 3, and 7, or something like that. You very much should be able to align what you're planning to do with the broader European frameworks. The third one, nothing much here. There has been a study undertaken which looks at, you know, policy models for the integration and innovative use of digital technologies in education. It hasn't gone beyond that study at this case, and to be honest, I couldn't find the study itself. But if you're interested in looking more at what has been done, there is a link here for you to go back and have a look at that, especially for those who are thinking about looking at, you know, senior level, policy level interaction. Finally, and this is very interesting, if you're looking for a project that might be looking at institutional change, there is already something called DigComp.org, which allows an organization to consider its level of development. And so it's, you know, it's a framework for somebody to self-assess against, and you'll see some interesting things there. Teaching and learning practices, for example, content and curricular, collaboration, infrastructure, leadership and governance, assessment practices, etc. So there are things against which people, organizations can self-determine its level of progress. And therefore, again, if this is what you're doing, you certainly need to be referring back to that which has already been done. And that's not to say that there isn't room for innovation or for, you know, making innovation something that is relevant to your audience, your institution, the country, etc. But, you know, that innovation needs to be contextualized within that which has already been financed. So that's enough from me. That was a whistle-stop tour very much. I'd like to now hand over to Jane O'Hara, who is going to, from Trinity College Dublin, of course, who's going to give us some key concepts in and around digital education from her own experience. I need to turn off my screen share here and let Jane come in. Jane, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Can I just check that you can hear me okay still? All good, great. I switched to headphones just to block out any background noise. So I'm going to turn off my camera here as well, just to preserve my bandwidth, just in case. And I'm going to start sharing my screen with you now. Okay, so hopefully you can all see that. Is that my first slide, Siobhan? Yeah, great.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Always good to know. So just a little bit about me before I start. My background is in biology. I spent a few years in scientific research before becoming more interested in education, and then over time, more specifically in digital technology education. So right now, I am working for a division in Trinity College called Trinity Access, and I'm the coordinator there of several Erasmus Plus projects with some colleagues. And I also manage a postgraduate course for teachers in 21st century teaching and learning. And digital skills are a key part of both. Just wanted to show you a picture from last year's course for the teachers. So usually what we would do with them is bring them into Google for their first module session. We have a partnership with Google and Grand Canal Doc, so that's always really good fun for the teachers. And we focused really on very hands-on workshops with technology. They get to do a lot of brainstorming. They come up with project ideas together in teams. It's very collaborative, and they create a product such as a video or podcast together by the end of that day. So this year, obviously, we won't be going into Google, and we're going to have to do everything online instead, which is, although we have always used technology in this course, it's a different thing to actually bring that online as opposed to doing it face-to-face. And then this is just a picture I wanted to share of one of our Erasmus project groups. So this project is called Teaching for a Sustainable Tomorrow. It's just about to finish actually this year. It's been going on for 3 years. The students on the left are from a school in Romania, and the ones on the screen are from a school in Portugal, and they're doing a collaborative project together via Skype or digital platform of their choice. So I think actually this project was quite prescient in terms of how we've all ended up learning this year. And it's interesting to think about how projects such as this can actually continue on quite smoothly because it was all taking place online anyway, as long as the students in each school are actually able to meet each other in person. So just wanted to share a little bit about what I do. And so digital and remote education. So what are teachers saying about it? Some of my colleagues in the School of Education in Trinity this year wanted to find out how this sudden pivot to online teaching went for teachers and what were the learnings from that. So they did a large survey of a few hundred teachers in Ireland. That's just the report, the cover of the report there that I've shown. It's very interesting, and I've included the website link there if anyone wants to go and read the whole thing. I'm just going to give a couple of highlights. So two of the main things that really came out of that, I think about 600 teachers were surveyed in Ireland, and a lot of them in deaf schools. So connection before content was a phrase that came out of this. The schools who took time to connect with students, talk to them, ask them what they needed, how they were, and kept in contact with them, not just around academic matters, but personal matters as well, managed to have better attendance and engagement through the period of online teaching. Confidence with technology was also unsurprisingly a predictor of better outcomes for engagement. So the teachers who were able to hit the ground running in terms of setting up virtual learning kept the students more engaged because they didn't have that lag time. So we've also spoken to teachers involved with our Teaching for a Sustainable Tomorrow project, teachers who've done our course, and they generally were able to not struggle as much with setting up virtual learning as well. And this confidence seemed to rub off on the students. So some issues to consider for the adaptation to online learning. Now, it's really what we need to consider when designing digital educational experiences. I've just condensed it into 3 issues really to discuss today in this short talk. So they're partly from that report, based on what teachers said about what didn't work so well or any questions that they had about designing online learning, and partly from my own experience in planning to deliver our postgrad course online, and lots of observations from taking part in a lot of digital training this year. So really the 3 things are, number 1, the division of time. So how to make the most of the synchronous time that you have live with students or participants, and what content could be sent as work to do independently, so offline. Number 2, then, collaboration was one of the things that didn't happen for a lot of teachers during the pandemic. In other words, students working together. It was one of the things that seemed harder to do in an online environment. So if we are going to do it online, how do we make it meaningful? And thirdly, then, social presence. So when students can't see us as teachers and they can't see each other, how do we encourage them to engage and be motivated to learn? The social context is an important part of how we learn. And you'll probably notice I am talking mostly about teachers and students here because that's mostly my background. But a lot of this will apply to, say, online training and participants in webinars and that kind of thing as well. So firstly then, the division of time. So you want to try and limit the amount of time people have staring at a screen, listening to content, especially if it's a long lecture. So some solutions could be to make these sessions as active as possible. So this is interesting to me, as we're now asking the question of whether some adaptations to online education might actually be better for learning than what we used to do before. So an hour-long lecture with no breaks or engagement would be one example, and plenty of people do that in person. But is it really the best way to learn? There are accessibility concerns too. So are there now accommodations that we've been forced to make for everybody due to the pandemic in using particular technologies that people with disabilities maybe were told before couldn't be done? So what are some potential things you can do in that live time that you have? So really dividing up the lectures into chunks. 15 minutes max is apparently the time that people can concentrate on any one subject, and then you can intersperse that content with breaks and activities. The types of activities you can do, so active learning is really important, things like polls. A lot of the online platforms like Zoom and others have polls that are built in, so you could just think about this in advance and use it to engage the people that you're teaching. It's interesting about polls. I'll give you an example in a second. You can use mentimeter.com. That's a very easy one that we've actually used a lot in person and online sessions. And then another thing would be to encourage questioning. So to encourage a two-way flow of conversation so that the people you're teaching feel involved. There's one example I have from modeling the chat function. We held an information session last week for people interested in joining our course. There was about 30 people. So we started by asking the attendees what county they were tuning in from, followed by what subject they teach, and they were to put that in the chat box. So this has a dual function. The participants are testing out the chat function, so they're more likely to then feel comfortable using it during the session to ask questions. And it also gave us information about who is tuning in. It is just a point, it is really useful if you can have a second facilitator monitoring the chat. I know this isn't always possible, but it's a lot to do for one person to be presenting and also trying to monitor questions. This is just an example of a poll that we did last week in that session with Mentimeter. We just asked participants, what would you like to get out of the course this year? And they had we popped a link in the chat and they had to go to that link and add 3 words. Then Mentimeter just populates this word cloud, and you can then add another link so people can see the words flowing in. And it just is a good way to quickly engage with participants, and it doesn't really take very long to set up. So then the second point really that I want to focus on, the collaboration and teamwork and how to make it meaningful. So we're doing a digital media literacy session in a couple of weeks with about 80 students, quite a lot. This is the one that we normally do in person. So they're going to be asked to make a 1 to 2 minute video together during the session. So what this really means is that in the online environment, one student will have to volunteer to put the video together using the software of choice and sharing their screen with others. So it doesn't seem super collaborative in some ways, but it's sort of the best we can do. I mean, they will be collaborating firstly on what the video is going to be about, so they can do this planning using a shared Google Doc. But it does bring up certain questions. For example, we're just going to have to be open about the situation and not pretend that maybe this is the way to do it, but to discuss other options that could be done online or face to face. Our participants are teachers, so we'll expect they'll have their own ideas about how they could adapt this in their own classrooms. And modeling of good teamwork as well, I think. So talking about how the roles are chosen, having the leader who's making the video explaining what they're doing at the time to keep engagement going, that sort of thing. Then in breakout groups, I think it's important to be really clear about the task and aims and the time given. So have all the materials provided that they need. Tell people before you put them into a breakout group what they're going to be expected to do in there, so that they can really get started as quickly as possible. And then using your facilitators wisely. So are you going to have the facilitators drop into the breakout rooms, or are you going to have it so that the participants have to drop out again? So just having these things in mind can help. Then reflection is important as well. So we know that maybe a session like this is going to be a bit of a baptism by fire in terms of virtual collaborating, and some things may not work out as well as we'd hoped, but they will definitely have learned a lot, and the point will be to reflect on what worked and what didn't. So hopefully we can help them let go of designing the perfect session, and ourselves as well. We're all sort of in this together. It's all fairly new to a lot of us. So we are, by doing this, we're modeling the process for them of what it's like to be a student going through a task, and that's something they'll have to think about when designing their own experiences. Finally then, social learning. So how to create meaningful connections between students and staff. It's unfortunate that the informal social interactions between participants in a class or training are lost with virtual learning. So beginning and end of the day, you don't have that sort of meeting new people and introductions, coffee breaks, downtime between activities, etc. And it's also hard for staff to get to know students and vice versa. So what can we do about that? So I have to come back to connection before content. So starting by humanizing the staff, letting the students see that the staff are actually people as well, having the staff maybe lead the introductions and say something about themselves that isn't just about their work. And then not launching straight into content. If you have the time to make students feel a bit more comfortable by introducing some icebreakers, coffee breaks, that kind of thing, and scaffolding that so that they know what's expected. We're also thinking about student spaces. So I mentioned coffee chats there, that maybe they could be designated breaks during sessions, as well as obviously the breaks that people need to go off and make a cup of tea, use the bathroom, etc. The timing really is going to be important, because a lot more breaks are probably going to be required when people are just staring at a screen. Then we are also going to build in open forums online, and hopefully some of these will be for students only, so that they can connect with each other in between sessions, especially when they're doing the course together for the whole year. It's important to try and create that sense of community. Then the staff availability is an issue. So we're also going to be introducing extra designated check-ins or tutor sessions in between classes. I think a bit of extra flexibility is also important, and with deadlines and that kind of thing, because students will be anxious, and giving feedback early and often. So just a couple of final thoughts to wrap all that up. I think overall it's really important to decide what you want to do in your online session, and then pick the platforms that best suit these activities, rather than picking the platform first and then saying, well, can we do this? So that means really testing out the platforms that you're using and the different features early and often. So I just want to say thank you for listening today and for the opportunity to speak, and best of luck with everyone's digital journeys this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. That's great. Now I'm going to share my screen again.
Great. Thank you.
Wonderful. So let's go back to the screen. Okay, some very interesting words there, some useful reminders. In fact, some of the things that we perhaps didn't introduce ourselves, we haven't had lots of breaks. I think the pressure of time this morning is honest, but certainly we are going to take now a little opportunity to hear a little bit from you guys, because of course we could just roll in and keep talking about digital education, but we do want to know whether what we're talking about, what we're expressing, what we're saying is of use. Is it valid? Does it make sense to you guys who perhaps may be at the front line? We want you to reflect, in a sense, a little bit. We had planned to go into breakout rooms, but literally we don't have the time. In a 60-minute session, it was too ambitious. But we do want to invite you to share some thoughts. And this applies to everybody, organizers as well. And really just for you to share in a word or a short phrase, the answers to these 3 questions. So the first question, and you can use the chat box, guys. You'll have seen I've already put a little invitation there, or if you just want to go back to the basics and write something down, put it on a piece of paper and share it with the screen, that is also acceptable. But what is the biggest challenge in terms of the digital transformation of education and training? I know it's a big question for this time of the morning, but you know, put something down. I expect everybody to share something. I'll give you a minute. If there's something particularly exciting, challenging, or that I don't understand, I might ask you to voice this, but we are under pressure of time. So mostly I'm just going to have a look at what we're sharing. So think about the question, what is the biggest challenge for those of us who are being asked to transform the way we deliver education and training digitally? So here we go. They're starting to come in. Student engagement. I think that's a broad challenge for digital and non-digital. Digital skills of the end user. Yes. What is our starting point? Confidence for the teacher and the learner. Yes, we've talked about this for a long, long time. Which one is the most advanced? Agility. Yes. Oh, these are going fast, by the way. I'm going to scroll back down again. Okay, agility, learners' access to the right technology. Yes, we do make an assumption in the sense that everybody has technology, but is it the right technology? Does it have access to the right? How old is the piece of hardware? Do they have access to the required softwares and so on? Technology and time, coordination of teachers and students. We had some interesting messages there. I've been using the term bite-sized chunks for many a time, and it's quite nice to see that we're back to that, you know, delivering digestible information and activities that young people and other learners will take on board. Isolation, absolutely, yes. Gap between what you're providing and what the students are experiencing. Have we incorporated those feedback loops? Is what we think we are delivering being delivered from the other side? Because the face-to-face judging isn't always being able to be done. Besides the challenges of access to digital technology, maintaining student engagement and motivation. I'm just checking I haven't missed any screens here. Lots of people on screens. Nobody's using the old-fashioned way of holding up bits of paper, but I just want to make sure I haven't missed them out. Yes. The gap left by the loss of social learning. It was addressed in our previous presentation there, absolutely. And how do we replace that? How do we embed that? How do we address that? And some interesting things there about, you know, making time for that social aspect. I think that's almost like, you know, how do we make time without it feeling, you know, too fake? You know, now is the time where you must go and meet somebody else. How do we embed that in a natural manner while still allowing time for it? And I think that is a challenge. Biggest challenge, educators becoming familiar, comfortable and proficient in digital skills and platforms. Absolutely. You know, there's a bottom-up aspect in digital technologies now that younger people are often perhaps perceived to be more familiar. And it's just making sure that there is that confidence and competence. Motivation for students and parents. There's an interesting new group, very important one. Language development in an online space. Digital fatigue. I think we've all experienced that in the last 6 months. Ethical technology, and if you send materials in advance, flip learning, how do we make sure that people are doing this? I suppose that's really part of the process of reflecting on learning. Yes, thank you very much. Lots of challenges, and I think that what I suppose we're giving you here is an opportunity to reflect on what it is that we need to be doing and what should projects being financed under digital education readiness be focusing on, and there's lots of potential there. Now let's have a look at another question. And this is one that's always very interesting for me. I spend a lot of my time in and around European funded developments in education and training. That can be mobility, that can be, you know, collaboration across a small number or a very large number of countries. But what I often ask myself is, what's the argument for doing this in a transnational environment rather than simply just doing it? Going into your office, and that could be your home office these days, and just getting on with it, having it done in 6 months and being finished. What is the added value of doing something in a transnational collaborative 1 or 2 year project? So the question for you guys is, how might transnational collaboration assist with this process of digital transformation? So in other words, what is the transnational benefit? Here we go. Let's see. So share your answers again. Everybody should give me something. Language development and digital fatigue. Okay, so question 2. Thank you. Somebody at least give me that. Tapping into the skills of your partners and learning from them and their expertise. More room for new and creative ideas. Good. New perspectives. Sharing what works. Creative communities. Yes, I quite like this. Any other thoughts? That's 3. Connectivity, creativity, sharing and evolving best practice. So good. Learning from each other, empowering each other. Thank you, Annette. Yeah, I mean, we've got a few things more coming in now. Intercultural perspectives, opportunities, learning, different funding models are coming in again. Yes. So what I'm hearing here, of course, is that the big words are this sharing. It's about acknowledging the fact that we do a certain thing, but perhaps what we do is, yes, I like that one, Jane, escaping the way. This is where we've always done it, getting out of that, because being given an opportunity to reflect on the fact that there is an alternative, and seeing that alternative as something that is already operational and perhaps being implemented, and seeing that perhaps there are successes, new ways of learning, traveling with minds without being really able to be traveled. Oh, I love that one, Magda. Thank you very much. Yes, we're going to have to travel digitally and open our minds because we're not being able to travel in any other way, increasing the level of explaining. So yes, good, you've got it. And I think that what I suppose I wanted to underline here was that not only should you be presenting innovative ideas under this call and any other future call, but you should be looking at the benefits and the added value of doing this in a transnational initiative. And therefore, is this about exchange? It's about identifying alternative delivery mechanisms. It's about looking at successes and challenges of delivering digital education from somebody else's perspective. And that's all very good. Here's a long one. Transnational collaborations open up so many possibilities and connections anyway, but even more so as being digitally, as all can be linked without traveling. So making everything in a sense accessible, as long as you have, I suppose you still need that contact point. European citizenship, yes, well, I live in Scotland, so that's always a challenge at the moment, but nonetheless, you know, we're very pro here up above the border. But yes, they are, yes, building, developing, acknowledging, recognizing that there is more than what we see on the ground in our own environments. Thank you very much. One more question, then we're going to go on to our final input from Lauren. I suppose I'm being purposely provocative with this one. Are there any aspects of education and training where, you know, if there was an option, that we shouldn't consider digital transformation, that we should be looking at sustaining wherever possible face-to-face or existing models of delivery that are perhaps less digital? Is there something that perhaps doesn't work as well through digital means? And if so, because yes or no isn't what I'm looking for here, guys, what is it? So have a little think. 1 minute, and then we'll look at some of the answers. This is the last question of the three. We're not getting anything yet. So it's very interesting. Ah, there we go. They're starting to come in. Yes, okay, now that's better. Empathic, sorry, humanity. To know the self, not empathetic humanology. Okay, we're digging deep here now. Social aspects and learning to deal with people. Social aspects are more difficult to bring online. Work placement and work experience. Yeah, I mean, we're living in a world at the moment where we're expected to do everything digitally. When we were fully locked down, we were shopping digitally, and now there's a few more freedoms are afforded. We're still very much working through digital means. And I suppose it's very difficult to think out of that box in which we are currently in terms of what could we do or what should we do non-digitally. But yes, we are getting some thoughts here. So the ideas of work experience or transnational mobility experience, the idea of, you know, yeah, I'm just reading everything at the same time here. The social interactions that may not be able to be replaced fully, and the building in something that may be there. And a lot of the terms I'm hearing now are about hybrid models, you know, that the future may well be a hybrid of some of the things that we have done traditionally that work better in that manner, and some of the things that we will continue to do digitally that we have learned new tricks in a sense. Some areas, oh, here we go. Sports team training is difficult to envisage through digital connection. Yes, but digital tools can support this. Yes, some areas where there's a practical element to the training can benefit from workshops. So hands-on, translating theory into practice. Absolutely, there are, you know, some things that are difficult to envisage, but you know, technology is growing fast, and so you know, augmented reality and certain reality, you know, different tools will allow us to do different hands-on practices as well. Right, guys, I'm going to stop talking and hand over to our next speaker. We have the luxury to hear this morning from Lauren Carroll from The Wheel, and she's going to talk to us about her own experiences of digital education and to share some thoughts in and around her own project-based experiences. Lauren, I'm going to stop sharing and ask you to come on board and share your slides.
Thank you, Paul. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, morning, and those questions were actually a perfect segue, I hope, into my presentation. So my name is Lauren. I am the program manager at The Wheel, and for the last 2 years I've been managing the Scope project. So I'm going to take just a couple of minutes. I know we're over time, so I'll go as fast as I can through my slides. So I'll just flick through what Scope. Okay, so a couple of years ago in The Wheel, maybe even longer than that, we realized that we needed to make our training more accessible. And we wanted to put a system in place where we could recognize the non-formal learning within our sector. And I should say The Wheel is a charity, so we will connect with other charities, community and voluntary groups and social enterprise. So kind of a broad civil society perspective. And the idea for Scope was born. So Scope is the skills recognition, capacity building and professional development for the third sector. It is an online training resource that we have developed through a 2-year strategic partnership that was funded by Erasmus+. Essentially, it offers online training in the fundamentals of governance, communications, risk, finances and fundraising. And each of these modules are linked with a digital badge. So the digital badge system is what we went with to validate learners' learning, and it's also a means of communicating their learning. During the project, we piloted Scope twice, so it's been thoroughly tested, and we've produced a project study. So I'll touch on that towards the end of my presentation. So the Scope project had 4 intellectual outputs. Content development was led by The Wheel. The website and adapt platform development and build was led by Untitled, so a second Irish partner. Our colleagues from Finland led on the validation system, our digital badges. And then finally, SCVO, or the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations, led on the pilot and the project study. And outside of that, other activities in the Scope project included our joint staff training event. So this was actually a brilliant opportunity for a couple of colleagues from each of the partner organisations to come together in person when it was safe to do so at the time. And we trained each other to become Scope experts, so that at this stage of the project, now that we finally launched, we would have a number of people in each organisation that would be expert in Scope to be able to support learners with their learning journey as they took the Scope training. Dissemination and project management speak for themselves, something that all partners were involved in throughout the duration of the project. Transnational and online meetings. We were lucky that we got to meet 3 times in person. Our final meeting was disrupted because of COVID, but we moved online and met on Zoom. And then our final activity was a couple of weeks ago, the 15th of September, when we held our virtual multiplier event. And we were absolutely delighted because in Ireland, we got over 200 people attending our event, which really shows that there is a real appetite for online learning and e-learning tools, digital education. Okay, so just a quick input on our approach. The Wheel led on the content development. It was the first intellectual output, and it really kind of took up a good chunk of the first year of our project. So we identified the 5 topics that we wanted to offer training in. We decided that they would be taster courses, so they would be kind of, you know, the entry level. And then the next step for the learner would be to do a more advanced learning, whether it be blended in a face-to-face workshop or again online. And at the center of all of this was the learning outcomes and the learner themselves. So we decided on the learning outcomes as a partnership for each of our modules. And from there, we worked backwards with the scripting. So that was something that added to us being able to produce good content. And Paul referred to it earlier, it's kind of bite-sized chunks of content. We wanted to avoid the long scripts and long chunks of text. So we added in case studies, we added in interactive quizzes, and we wanted to ensure that what we offered was something that was engaging for the learner, and you know, they were able to reflect on their learning as they worked through each of the modules. Our content was standard across the partnership and all partner languages, but we had to allow for some flexibility, particularly with the governance module, because charity law here in Ireland is not the same as charity law in other partner countries. So along with translation of these 5 modules, partners also had to adapt to their national context. The second output then is focused on the kind of technical support, and this was led by Untitled. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with them here in Ireland. They built the e-learning platform. they had to find a solution for incorporating the learning platform with the digital badge system and bringing that together. They also handled all of the implementation of the translated content in Finnish, Latvian and Estonian, as well as the second English version for Scotland. They were really focused on ensuring that we had the AAA standard of accessibility guidelines for visually impaired users. They did a lot of testing throughout, and they hosted and developed the website as well. So the results of this output were Scope is now housed in an e-learning authoring tool called the Adapt Builder. Our website was built using WordPress. As mentioned, Uncasan were able to work with all partners and ensure that each of the translated modules was uploaded onto the Adapt Builder. They produced a user guide for the learning tool, and that was again translated by each partner, and they ensured that it was tested and that we did meet those AAA standard guidelines for the Adapt authoring tool. Digital badges then. So this is something that was new for myself and for the Wheel. It's a new enough concept here in Ireland, so something that we're really excited about, and we want to kind of develop and grow a little more. In this output, it was led by our Finnish colleagues, Siva Study Centre, who had a lot of experience not only of Erasmus Plus projects, but of the digital badges as well. So here we wanted to develop a validation system that recognises non-formal learning. We wanted to develop a means of communicating the learning and skills within our sector, and we wanted to encourage greater visibility of skills. And we're going to do this through the Open Badge Passport and through linking these digital badges with social media. And there's also a third option of downloading digital certificates with your badge on them, which, for example, you could share with your employer if you were trying to, you know, prove your learning for the year or training courses that you've taken part in. And ultimately what we want is for digital badges to be recognised really easily and widely used across our sector. So some results from this output: we have badges for all modules in all partner languages, so one for each of the 5 modules, with a 6th badge that we're calling the Scope Bumper Badge, and that's automatically awarded to learners who have completed their 5 modules, applied for and accepted their 5 Scope badges. During our pilot, testers reported 88% satisfaction rate with the validation system. 1,100 badges were applied for, meaning that the learning outcomes were met that number of times. And then finally, 46% of testers reported that badges improved their ability to share their skills and knowledge. So this is quite low, and it is the one area that we came in under what we had hoped to achieve. So we set ourselves an 80% benchmark, 80% satisfaction rate, I should say, across everything that we tested in the pilot, but this one just came in a little bit lower. But we reflected on it, and we understand now why that was. I suppose the duration of the project was short. It was 2 years, with the pilot happening mostly in the second year. And that was just too short a time for us to be able to expect any meaningful impact for digital badges. We were a little over ambitious. So we know that now there needs to be more investment into the concept of digital badges. We ourselves need to understand them better and then share our learning externally and promote the benefits of them. We know that they have lots of potential, so it's something that we're committed to doing, both in the Wheel and as a Scope partnership. And I've mentioned here at the bottom a validation system recognition strategy that's available in our project study. So just a couple of pages on our plans in relation to digital badges. If you want to have a read of that, it'll be linked at the end of the presentation. And these icons here are the 5 digital badges that link to each of the modules, with the gold cup being the 6th bumper badge. I've taken this screen grab from my own Open Badge Passport. So my profile is public. It's just a little bit about me at the top, and then you can see the recent badges that I have achieved. There are the 5 Scope badges with the 6th bumper badge, and these can be shared directly to social media, so LinkedIn, Twitter or Facebook. And as I said, you can download the digital certificate or get a shareable link if you wanted to share it with your colleagues or networks. Our 4th and final output was the pilot of Scope, as well as the project study. So the first part was the pilot. All of our partners carried out a 2-part pilot process in each country. and our target audience were small organizations. So those organizations who had 5 or fewer staff. What we were looking to test was the clarity, quality, and impact of the content. We wanted to test the accessibility of the learning platform, test the use of the validation system, and as mentioned, we wanted to achieve 80% satisfaction rate among testers. I'm really pleased to say we did achieve that in all but that one area on digital badges, but we know now why, so we can improve going forward. We managed to link in with just over 200 testers across the partner countries. We tested all language versions, including the training content and validation system. One big thing that we picked up on during our first pilot, which we were able to improve and fix ahead of the second pilot, was our accessibility. So we had a number of testers who use screen readers due to a visual impairment, and they reported back to us that some of the activities that we had introduced weren't that compatible with their screen reader. So through their feedback, we were able to respond and improve the types of activities in the Scope platform. So that was really, really useful for us, and it just allowed us to kind of finely tune what we now have to offer. The final part then of the final intellectual output is the project study. So we have an executive summary as well as the project study, both linked here that you can read. And essentially, we wanted to be able to provide a replicable best practice model that provides a guide to the future sustainability and exploitation of the platform for partners and the wider sector. So essentially what we did, how we did it, our approach, what went well, and what mistakes we made along the way. So if you and your organization are interested in developing an e-learning tool as we have, you could pick up our guide and read through what we did well and what we didn't do so well, and go from there, and hopefully that would inform your project going forward. So just 2 final slides on wins and learnings. So we were lucky in that COVID-19 didn't disrupt too much of our project activity. A project meeting and a multiplier event had to go online, but we were able to collaborate in person for the majority of the project. And so some of the learnings were the adaptation and translation were difficult for partners who didn't speak English as their first language. It was more time consuming than we had considered. So it's just something to give more time to if we ever developed this again or went into a new project that was focused on e-learning. I mentioned the adaptation of the governance module because of the different national contexts. Again, not only were partners translating, they had to adapt as well. We learned that principles-based content is more transferable. So things like communications, which is very principles-based, can be easily adapted and transferred country to country. And then I guess our biggest learning was we decided from the outset at our kickoff meeting in Dublin that we weren't going to build in a user profile and log in to Scope. On reflection, it's definitely something that would have made it easier for us as a partnership to track, who's used it, the most popular modules, that type of thing. But we didn't at the time. It's just something to consider for future iterations of Scope or other tools. I think it would enhance the program, so something that we'll carry forward. More investment is needed to mainstream digital badges, and there is definitely an appetite and need for further e-learning opportunities. So I guess we are at a good time as this new call is here in terms of digital education. Our wins, this was the first time the Wheel had moved into the e-learning space. So we're absolutely delighted to be able to offer the Scope training tool now free of charge and open to everybody within the sector. Digital badges, again, it was our first move into this space. So we have 5 digital badges available in all partner languages with the Scope bumper badge. And then another first was, this was our first Erasmus Plus project. So we were fortunate enough to be the lead organization of this project, and it was brilliant. It was brilliant experience for me. It was brilliant experience for the Wheel, and it really opened us up to so many possibilities through Erasmus Plus, through working with partners, through working in international partnership. And I'm thinking back to question 2 earlier with Paul, just what it brings to the partnership is the skills that you don't have in-house yourself in your own organization. So being able to tap into the expertise of your partners and bring it together and collectively achieve a project like this was just super. So that was a big win for ourselves in the Wheel. So just to wrap up, Scope is available. There is online training in the 5 areas of governance, fundraising, communications, risk and finance. You can apply for your digital badge in recognition of your learning. And I have linked the website here. So if you're interested, I'll pop it into the chat box in just a second, but that is where you can head to if you are interested in taking the Scope training. My contact details are there. Feel free to get in touch with me. And likewise, the project study and summary guide is also available if you'd like to have a flick through that. We'd be delighted for you to engage with the program. So I'll stop.
Thank you, Lauren. There is one question. I know that we're very much out of time, but if you could just maybe give us a very short answer. Jerry has asked, if Jenny's asked there, did you use a third-party application for the badging? Was it something you developed yourself, or did you get something off the shelf?
No, we use Open Badge Factory, so it was something that already exists. I think it's quite easy for an organization to sign up and be an issuer of the badges. So yeah, Open Badge Factory.
Great, thank you for that, just to get that clarification. And yeah, there are lots of stuff out there, guys. Again, open badges, if this is the way that you think you're going to go with your project, please do be aware that things exist on the market. So be aware and check and make sure that you are complementing, building on, or making use of. We are just going to the last sort of 60 seconds of our presentation. So I just want to pull this in now and just give you a wrap up, and then we will go. I think we're running over. We've already lost one person who had to run for another meeting. So just put that there, thanks. So in summary and close, we've had, you know, insights into European frameworks, the availability of funding. We've had some thoughts on key concepts from Jane, and we've had a project-based experience from Lauren. And I really just wanted to give you the 60-second close, which was, guys, think about conformity in terms of digital education, in terms of this European funding pot, this extraordinary Erasmus Plus funding. Make sure that you align with the objectives and the priorities for this call as were outlined at the start, and the focus. Complementarity and creativity. We've mentioned the frameworks, you've heard about, you know, existing off-the-shelf responses. Make sure that you creatively and convincingly take us beyond what already exists at institutional level, on the market, within and beyond your own institution and country, and make sure that you provide arguments for that for not only your own country. This is not just about Ireland, but also about all the partner countries as well. Coherence and contingency. Come up with a plan of activities and outputs that take us from where we are now to where you want to go. So that objective should be achievable through a series of deliverables, and they can be activities or outputs or actions, but also make sure you have a backup plan. What happens if you can't deliver something face-to-face? We're now aware of the fact that COVID-19 is here. We don't know how long it's going to be. Don't make your project undeliverable if something has to be done in a slightly different manner. And finally, don't forget the deadline, completion and submission by 11 o'clock Irish time on the 29th of October. And my recommendation is try and get it in at least the day before, because everybody's trying to push the submission button on that day. From that, there are some links here. You know, this is being videoed, of course, so I think we'll get access to that at the end. But otherwise, thank you very much for your time this morning. We are out of time, and we wish you all a very good, enjoyable rest of the day. Goodbye.